So welcome, everyone. I think some people may still be joining in, but we'll give them a chance to come in as we proceed. Let's get started. We have an exciting topic ahead of us and three excellent speakers. So my name is Aaron Cosby. I'm a senior associate with the Intergovernmental Forum on Mining, Minerals, Metals, and Sustainable Development, the IGF. Just a small note of context on who we are. IGF is an intergovernmental organization. The Secretariat is the International Institute for Sustainable Development, which is based in Canada. IGF's an intergovernmental organization that serves its 75 member governments with policy advice. Most of those governments are resource-rich countries, most of them developing, but not all. We receive a great deal of, we receive core funding from the Natural Resources Canada in Canada. So we're delighted to have you here. We have a number of participants indicating an interest in this topic. We're excited to get going with it. Stacy, if we could take it to the next slide. A little bit about why we're here. There are, as we all know, two major disruptive drivers shaping the future of mining. One long-term driver that has been going for many years but has accelerated technological change. And the other, a much more immediate and short-term driver, that is the COVID-19 crisis, both the health crisis and the economic fallout from that crisis. We're here to talk about what the interplay of those two drivers means, both for government policy and for how mining companies plan, operate, and invest. A little more about the topic in just a moment, but if we could go to the next slide. This webinar is part of the IGF's COVID response series. This is a series that deals with the impacts of COVID and mining on the mining sector in three different areas: on employment impacts, on fiscal policies, and as a part of this particular seminar on new technology. The series involves blogs, both our own and invited, briefing papers, commentaries, and webinars like this one. If we could go to the next slide. This series is also part of an ongoing stream of work at IGF on new technology and what it means for the mining sector, what it means for mining affected communities and host countries. It's a project by the name of New Tech, New Deal, and also a longer stream of work within IGF. The New Tech, New Deal project is funded by GIZ and is a partnership between IGF and the Columbia Center for Sustainable Investment, as well as Mining Shared Value. The premise of the project, and this also gives us some kind of context for today's webinar, is that there is a suite of new technology coming down the pipeline in the mining sector that has promised to shape up and disrupt the mining sector in the same way that other sectors like manufacturing, entertainment, retail, finance have been massively disrupted by new technology. In the mining sector specifically, it's a suite of technologies taken from other areas, but which pulled together as a suite offer immense benefits. They offer optimization of production. And they offer increased viability of operations in places where the reserves and deposits don't justify it using conventional technology. They offer, at times, greenhouse gas reductions, the possibility of more women in the workplace, and importantly, improvements in worker safety, health and safety. They also mean, however, potentially many fewer employees at the mine face. There will be new jobs created, and they will be better jobs, but the question is whether there will be as many of those created as were displaced by the technology. And in particular, the question is whether those high-skilled new jobs will be contestable by the locals whose low-skilled and medium-skilled jobs have been replaced by technology, in particular automation among the technologies, among the suite of technologies. The New Tech New Deal project sees these challenges as matters that are central to the social license to operate, and thus as critical for governments and private sector to invest some time in thinking about. The project explores the technology trends and has produced a technology impact report as part of its first phase, which you see featured here. This just summarizes the types of technologies coming down the pipeline, because technology is not a homogeneous glob. It is many different things, and automation has quite different impacts than system optimization, for example, digitalization. And it explores in the second phase the policy options to deal with the impacts identified in the first phase. The goal is to find some way to allow mining to continue to make its full contribution to sustainable development, even in the challenging times ahead. The final report of the project will be launched in February of 2021. And this webinar and consultations that have led up to that are feeding into that final report. So if I could go to the next slide. We're going to have, I'm excited about the speakers we have speaking on this. All three of these speakers have done some really interesting thinking on both the subject of new technology in the mining sector and what the COVID crisis and its major impacts have meant to the mining sector. And I apologize for not dwelling much on the impacts of COVID, but I think those are generally well known to this audience. So I think we can take them as for granted. We're going to have each of the speakers contribute a short presentation. Then we'll go to questions and answers with you, the participants, and then come back to the speakers for a short wrap up. The seminar will last 1.5 hours, a nice short thing. For me, that comes before breakfast. For many of you, it comes as a wrap up to your day. In terms of housekeeping, the questions and answers, if you could use the question and answer function in the Zoom feature. So at the bottom of your screen, there's a list of functions. And if you put your questions in the question and answer area, we'll be able to keep track of them, and we'll channel them to the appropriate speaker or speakers to have them answered during the question and answer session. So let's get started. We'll open the session. If we could go to Osvaldo Urzua. Osvaldo has got over 20 years of experience in the mining, innovation, collective action, and shared value space, including as head of government relations for BHP America and head of corporate affairs of Minera Escondida. He's leading on behalf of the Chilean Mining Policy Center, CESCO, a study on the impacts of new technology in the mining sector, and has been affiliated with the work we've done on New Tech New Deal for some time. Osvaldo, over to you to give us some framing comments on what these kinds of new impacts will mean and what kinds of policy implications, drawing from the work you've been doing.
Okay, thank you, Aaron, and also thank you to the IGF for the opportunity to share our work and to participate in such an important discussion. So so Stacy, probably you're planning to show some of my slides. Yes, just a second. Okay. So the question we're invited to address today is, what does the COVID-19 mean for new technologies and for the future of mining? And what I'm planning to do is just to address that question in the context of the Andean region and the copper mining industry in that region. Probably the short answer to that question is that COVID has just accelerated or speeded up the changes that were already happening. We are not talking about simple changes. We are related to the adoption of a new technology here or there. These are changes that are transforming the whole economy and that are transforming how production is organized and probably how societies are organized. It is much more than an important technological change process. It is probably a socio-technological or probably a socio-political transformation. And there is no back to the pre-COVID era. Maybe that is something that's a bit obvious, but it's quite important to to bear in mind that we're not talking about just how to manage a crisis, it's how to manage a transition. The first point that I would like to make is that because of the complexity and the scale of the transformation, to address its challenges require an holistic approach and to embrace the challenge in a collective way. Companies need to collaborate between each other, but also with government and with community. To succeed, all need to have to change, having some degree of synchronicity between each of the changing process, of the upgrading process. New business models are required, new finance approaches are required, new regulation and institutional arrangements are required, and even communities need to change in order to succeed in this transition. And because of that, collaboration and collective action, probably it is an imperative. When the COVID-19 hit us, the first challenge was to keep running operations in a safe way and to support communities to get some relief. This has been managed very effectively by most companies in my region, and in particular in my country, Chile. And some collaborative approaches started to emerge, such as working with the university to define new solutions to control the pandemic spread, or providing some support to suppliers to keep operating and providing them some cash, or even with the government to avoid stoppages when it is not required. But in general, action has been quite fragmented, and government capacity to coordinate such a complex crisis and transformation has been overwhelmed, at least in my region. A second set of challenges, which I think will take much more time to tackle, refer to how to organize a recovery by implementing the new way of production and interaction as a permanent activity, not as a response to an emergency, but as the new normal. Nobody knows exactly what the new normal is, but pursuing a more holistic, collective learning approach would help to start to identify the solution and to implement them. Here in this slide, it shows a work that CESCO is doing in a project in the copper mining sector of the Andean region that aims to identify policies and collective actions required to succeed in the adoption of new technologies, including how COVID is shaping this process. It is a scoping study that will require further elaboration, but will help us to identify a set of actions required to mitigate impacts and to grasp the opportunities. We are assessing a broad set of impacts and their interaction, which include, as the slides show, the improvement in terms of mining operations performance, the impacts in terms of employment, the impact in terms of local buying, and probably some of the novelties of these studies that is also including the impact in terms of local innovation, to what extent the COVID and the technological revolution is opening new spaces for local economies to participate in the innovation process enabled by the new technologies, and also the potential of mining to help to drive the transition to the broader economy. And hopefully creating wealth and supporting communities to thrive. So the scope is not just the mining industry, but also understanding the interaction of the mining industry with the broader economy, so that the opportunities, but also the most challenging impact can be addressed by having this broader scope. Stacey, if we go to the next slide, please. So the idea is to define the possible trajectories regarding the adoption of technologies and their impact in the Andean region, and to identify the kind of policies and collaborative actions that are required to pursue a trajectory to deliver the higher level of social value possible. The study is not ready yet, but what is starting to emerge is that the lack of coordination and the limited capacity governments has to coordinate and to develop regulations to support the transition is an obstacle. This is an area that industry should be supporting. In particular, it is very important to understand what the future would look like with and without the right set of policy and collaborative action. In this analysis, it is important to broaden the scope of technologies that is driving change, which is much more than robotics, digitalization, and automation. In particular, the technologies focused on reducing carbon footprint or environmental impacts can open up opportunities that are not obvious when the scope of analysis is limited just to traditional Industrial Revolution 4.0 related technologies. The analysis should also consider how these technologies, including the COVID-19 effect, will impact different categories of communities, as this table here is shown. By different communities, what I mean is how that set of technologies is impacting the local communities, the cities in mining regions, and also the metropolitan areas. And to get this kind of integrated or aggregated assessment in order to identify where are the pockets of opportunities, and also where are the areas of higher impact, in order to grasp opportunities and also to mitigate the negative impacts. This aggregated approach where we can see the Industrial Revolution 0.0 impacts, and also the low carbon and sustainability technologies that will be implemented, shows that there are some areas where some opportunities can be implemented. We haven't finished this research yet, but we expect to find solutions that wasn't considered before, including supporting the development of opportunity and offsetting of negative impacts under an integrated approach. Stacy, to the next slide, please. So finally, the last point that I would like to make is about the impact that this crisis is having in shaping business model. As mentioned before, the crisis is speeding up a transformation that was already happening. In particular, the era of shareholder supremacy is ending, and probably the era of a collective purpose-based engagement is emerging. Can you just make a click in order to show that's right. This requires a new business model. Business need to evolve from a approach that seeks to making money first and then making good, as it is illustrated in this slide, to approach that is making good and money together. The challenge is how to make this operational, to move from this idea into practice. Probably the adoption of the ESG standard is heading in that direction, and investors and finance are leading this process. But it is still pending to go beyond a compliance-based approach, to go beyond the checklist. We are working in the development of a methodology with some colleagues of Australia, and hope to have some news by the end of October of how this new methodology, in order to implement a practical way of pursuing a collective purpose-based engagement approach, works or look like. So Aaron, probably we should have a follow-up discussion in a couple of months. Huh? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Osvaldo. Yes, lots there to follow up on, and we're looking forward to the results of that research. I think that's a good framework for the discussion. Interesting framework of analysis for what's happening in the mining sector that the other two participants now are going to follow up on. So I'll turn now to Freudes Cameron Johansson. She's the Group Head of International and Government Relations at Anglo American. Prior to joining Anglo, Freudes has over a decade of experience in the oil and gas sector, working with Shell. She has also interestingly worked for the European Commission and for the US Senate as a speechwriter. So her political background and fluency are going to serve us well here. Freudes has also been a partner, collaborator in the New Tech New Deal project and work, and has obviously, given her role at Anglo, thought rather deeply about the the subjects we're broaching, both from the perspective of the Anglo as an operator and Anglo's many stakeholders in mining affected communities and countries. Freydis, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Aaron. Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. I couldn't agree more with what Oswaldo was saying. Every sort of nodding, like a nodding dog in the car. So it's really great work that CESCO is doing, and we really look forward to the outputs of the report and the studies, because I think everybody has so much to learn, and again really think about the pragmatic implementation of all this work, which ultimately is where the biggest challenge is. We can have as many reports as we want, but if we're not actually doing anything about it, then things will never kind of change. To really just to sort of build on what Oswaldo was saying, and I think as Aaron was saying, we've been doing quite a lot of thinking around the future of work. What does new technology mean? We have our technology and innovation program called Future Smart Mining, and how this is going to come to the fore in terms of the benefits in minimizing traditional mining's footprint from a sort of environmental impact perspective, whether it's the waterless mine, whether it's tailings dams with no wet tailings, whether it's actually being able to do precision mining, so you don't actually need the need for an open pit is no longer the case. These are all things that we're looking at in the innovation space. And as Oswaldo says, you know, innovation and new technologies, they really do bring huge benefits to society and also specifically to the mining sector as well, given the historical issues and legacies that we've had as a group, and how technology can really change how people think about mining and how we actually do it. And of course, there is nothing comes for free. And the price of change is that things change. And so there are people are often bear the brunt of change, both positively and negatively. And when we look at the whole digitization space and the automation space, the impact, as everybody knows, is going to be the number and the types of jobs. So before, before March this year, we were doing some quite deep thinking about this, and really to the point of, just because you can do something doesn't necessarily mean you should do something, or that you should do something in the most expedient way. So just because you can digitize everything, you know, doesn't necessarily mean you should digitize or automate everything without thinking about the decisions that you're making in the round, and actually really thinking about full impact decision making. So if I automate a mine in South Africa and that puts 3,000 people out of a job, is that really going to lead to the successful running of that automated mine in the future? You know, you really do need to think through the sort of consequences and decisions that you're making. So we were actually approaching this, and we're sort of using the working title of the social license to innovate. So actually not just the social license to operate, but again, this really links to the sort of new tech, new deal piece. What is your social license to innovate? How are you actually bringing all of these decisions and interlinkages together to actually push forward on some of the technological innovations that you're doing? And we were still working through this, but we'd put together 5 principles. And the 5 principles about doing this work were really about listening. So really not having the arrogance to say we know best and this is how we're going to do it, but actually engaging and really understanding the context in which we're operating. Collaboration and partnership, as Oswaldo said, you can't do anything by yourself anymore. So this needs to be done together with both government, with communities, with other stakeholders, and the industry more broadly. We need to invest in the future. And I don't just mean we need to invest in ITC infrastructure and big kit. We need to invest in the human resources and the human capital of the future. What are we doing in terms of thinking about the education and the skills so the next generation have the ability to participate in the jobs locally? There's no point in creating an automated mine in South Africa where no South African can participate for the few and the higher paying jobs that exist. So how are you preparing the next generation for that? Transparency. The one thing I've learned in my career is if you try to hide stuff or you're a bit shifty, you will always get found out. So it's better to be open and honest and have hard conversations early so that you can actually bring people along with you. And this is how we're actually finding some of our discussions with the unions as well. It's not that they don't want to talk about it. They are difficult conversations, but we're actually able to find a way through it based on a number of these principles. And to Oswaldo's final point, it's about being led by your purpose. So Anglo American's purpose is to reimagine mining to improve people's lives. So if we reimagine mining to be fully automated and fully digitized, and we put 3,000 people out of a job, did we really just improve people's lives? Those are the considerations that we really need to be thinking about and to really be grounded and led by our purpose. So again, innovation for the sake of innovation is not something that we're thinking about. We're thinking about it from a full impact decision process. So that was my life up until March. It was hard, it was difficult. We talked at Indaba about this. I felt pretty confident. I was very cognizant that in our operating context, which is very much in the Southern Hemisphere and a non-OECD context, that, you know, every job was sacred. So every job that's automated or changed or digitized, we have to be very aware of how we are supporting people through a responsible transition. And then COVID hit, and I was like, oh, well, on the one side, if ever there was a reason to de-densify, so you digitize and you automate to keep your mine running, COVID or a global health pandemic was absolutely a reason to do that, because, hey, a mine operated by 4 people in a de-densified, socially distanced control room can keep running, as opposed to a mine with 8,000 people going underground. So all of a sudden, the COVID context has, I know for a number of people listening on the call in different sectors, you're in this kind of dilemma. You know, if people can't work, they can't eat, they can't support their families. People can't, you know, support all of their community. How are they going to have access to the health facilities? All of these different types of things. And in some mining operations and mining communities, the mine operating provided the essential infrastructure to support the community. So when we'd sort of come up for air, we really wanted to understand, okay, well, you know, my social license to innovate context, which I was very comfortable with before, has completely changed. And so, you know, nothing in life stands still, but I really wanted to understand, okay, well, what does the current context and the future of this the future trajectory of the new current context mean for the work that we're doing around this? And I think one of the big things we really looked at and found was, you know, the discourse and discussion globally around inequality. And inequality can mean so many different things to different people, but we undertook a piece of research recently, which was really looking at, okay, inequality as a mega trend. Has COVID exacerbated it, changed its trajectory? How has it affected it? And what we really found was that, again, you know, when you look at inequality, we've sort of bucketed it into 2 bits. You know, you have the inequality of condition, which is about income and wealth. And then there's the inequality of opportunity. And that pertains to things like education, access to digital infrastructure, civil rights, basic rights, all of those types of things. And when you look historically back, you know, inequality has kind of been closing. So the gaps have been closing. But, you know, there are still disparities around. What I think COVID has served to really highlight is actually to maybe bring under the spotlight something that people knew was there but didn't really want to talk about. So, and this came at exactly the same time where there was a lot of news coverage about how COVID had really impacted people from an inequalities perspective disproportionately. And because you have all of this going on, it also kind of happened where the tolerance for inequalities that maybe previously wouldn't have been discussed or addressed, the tolerance for acceptance is now pretty much gone. So this has led to, you know, civil unrest. It's led to sort of disquiet. You've seen a lot of kind of campaigning to really address some of the qualities, whether it's around gender, generational, or race and ethnicity. So I think the context in which we're all operating has really quite changed significantly. And when we're looking at this, the sort of social license to innovate through the inequality prism, it really again falls into sort of other buckets where, you know, the climate change discussion is also often seen as one of intergenerational inequality as well. So the next generation are having to pay the price for what's been happening now from a climate perspective. With COVID and governments printing money like they're sweeties, you know, who's going to pay for all this? There's no such thing as free money. And that's also going to be an intergenerational thing. Here in Europe, we're seeing a lot of lockdowns, and a lot of the younger generation is saying, you are curtailing our freedom where we're not affected so much by the virus for the sake of the older generation. And you're starting to get that kind of discussion around the intergenerational inequalities for people who, you know, don't have jobs, their access to pension, to housing. It's actually much more diminished than it was previously. So when we're looking at this, all of the work that we were doing around the New Tech, New Deal and thinking about, well, how do you think about the fair share and the responsible transition to support our communities and our workers is really now having to think about, well, before, when every job was sacred, now every job is kind of super sacred. So how are we actually supporting governments and our communities around the employment issue? What are the jobs of the future and how can we support them in their participation? We're also having to now look at how do you start thinking about our contribution to other opportunities that are outside of the mining sector. So we historically like to do a lot of things with the value chain, with our supply chain, but how do we think bigger than that and start thinking about regions and their economic engine recovery and what our contribution is to support that, so that the recovery could almost be immaterial of the mine. So we've been working a lot with local government, with regional governments. We have a really big project at the moment in the Limpopo region in South Africa, where the regional and the national government are wanting us to all the mining companies to work together on how do they actually build and recover in a post-COVID context. And interestingly enough, this is the one partnership where we've had no NGO blowback about potential state capture or you know, is this an appropriate partnership or not? They've actually wanted to participate in how the recovery takes place as well. And then the other thing, and again, it goes back to kind of where governments are, is how are governments now going to be putting in, you know, policies and policy frameworks that are actually going to address some of the inequality issues that have been there for a long time, but people maybe haven't had the appetite or the funding to address a lot of these things. And again, what we're waiting to see, and this will be very interesting from us as a mining sector perspective, is our government's going to be looking to invest in the future to address these inequality gaps, both from a social and an environmental perspective as well. So will they be looking to put policy frameworks that are really shaping a Green New Deal at a local level so that they are addressing both the climate change issues as well as some of the more socio-political inequality issues as well. And this is where, again, we're working through, you know, what does that world look like? How can we support in the recovery? What engagement do we need to be making? Because if we don't engage as an industry in the most constructive way possible, the simple, blunt tool that governments always come up with is taxation. And again, they've been printing a lot of money. There is a lot of debt out there, and governments like to put up taxes to kind of recoup a lot of that debt. So how are we as an industry and a sector going to be working with the governments in partnership to make sure that the recovery in a post-COVID environment where jobs are becoming a real challenge, and in a new tech, New Deal environment, so that we don't stop the technological progress, because there are so many benefits to the technological progress and innovation programs that the mining sector is putting in. But it really starts to think about how are we supporting the governments, the countries and the communities in a way that addresses the inequality and also means that there is a sustainability for the transitions that we're going to have to make. And one of the big areas, and this is maybe something for IGF, I would really appreciate other members' inputs on this. It's really around education and skills development, because again, the whole education infrastructure how do you prepare the workforce of the future for the jobs of the future, is something that I think we're all kind of working through as an industry, but also at a country level as well. So I'll close there. I just think the whole New Tech, New Deal in the post-COVID context will require a new understanding of fair share. And if we don't really understand the inequality landscape in which we're operating, we're never going to get to a point that is going to be sustainable. So again, I think it's about unpacking some of the landscape and the context issues so we can put forward programs and partnerships that are really going to stand the test of time for the near future to make the transition as easy and seamless as possible.
Thanks, Freydis, for a really excellent presentation. I don't know if you finishing on the idea of easy and seamless may be a little incongruous with your description of the challenges. Because the challenges are substantial, as you say. You know, it was a complex enough endeavor when we were just trying to think about the challenges of new technology. And, you know, as you say, we thought we had a handle on all that. And then COVID came along and caused us to rethink some of the existing challenges and focus on, as you say, some of the existing problems that we all knew were there, but that weren't central to our concerns up to that point. Anyway, so thanks for your window into your thinking about those challenges from the Anglo perspective. I think it's going to fertilize some good discussion thereafter. Speaking of which, we have had a couple of submissions to the Q&A function, but just a reminder to participants, you can submit questions at any time. We'll be harvesting them and putting them to participants to respond when the three presentations are over. So let me turn then to the third presentation by Wessel Badenhorst. Wessel is a managing partner with Hogan Lovells in Johannesburg, where he focuses on mining law and in the firm's corporate and finance group. He has over 20 years of experience in the mining sector and has, like our other panelists, been thinking deeply about the challenges of new technology and the COVID crisis from the context of his perspective in South Africa. With some, of course, every country has a unique set of circumstances and challenges with regards to these drivers. But I think some of South Africa's challenges in particular have a global resonance that I think we'll benefit from. So Wessel, I pass it over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Aaron. A good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. I feel a little bit like the golfer who stands on the first tee, and there's just been two wonderful drives down the center of the fairway, and I'm about to hit my drive. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak as part of this panel discussion. And I share what Freydis had said at the beginning. I'm also not bobbing my head in complete agreement with some of the themes that have come through. Allow me to speak from a slightly different perspective, speaking as a lawyer, speaking from a legal perspective, and speaking from a regulatory perspective. I speak to you from a country synonymous with gold, diamonds, platinum, and 70% of the world's chrome reserves still here. The South African mining industry in context probably still has an estimated $2.5 trillion of mineral resources available for exploitation. But one immediately understands that conventional mining methods will not unlock that. And in the context of what we are discussing, and particularly picking up on the earlier comments of sustainable development, and particularly the social license to innovate, as you say, Freydis, that's the context within which we really grapple with a number of regulatory challenges that we face within South Africa. Now, if you think about where the South African mining industry is, it still represents approximately 8% of our GDP. It is extremely important in the context of the future of South Africa, and one cannot debate the future of South Africa without looking at the health and at the contribution of mining in South Africa. There has been certain trends which I call the evolution of the mining industry, and let's focus on one of those, the trend of employment. In 1994, at the dawn of the democracy in South Africa, the mining industry directly employed in the order of 750,000 people. Today, with a larger mining impact, we only employ 500,000 people. It's part of an evolution that we face in any event. And I'm going to ultimately say to you, as part of my hypothesis, there are three themes that I identify that we should be focusing on in looking at the evolution of the South African mining industry. And ultimately, there are three things that I think the South African government and regulator will have to focus on in order to preserve this industry for the benefit of the South African populace. A little bit of context is that I say that one has to consider a little bit the history of mining in South Africa. Mining in South Africa is rooted in the colonial history in South Africa, in this country. And as that developed into a point of a foundation of mineral law based on Roman Dutch law, ultimately at the dawn of democracy, we needed to find a creative way of dealing with the inequality and the centralization of mineral resources at that particular point in time. This government, or the democratic government, couldn't overnight expropriate minerals and develop a socialist or a communist approach to them, because the country simply couldn't afford it. So what the government had done is very creatively and very, very responsibly embarked on a process of the decentralization of minerals to allow the multiplicity of entrants into the South African mining space. Now, looking back, you would see in 1994, there were approximately 7 major mining houses that controlled mining in this country. Today, there are 58 members of the Minerals Council. And those are just the members. There are many other mining companies as part of it. And one can see that there has been a decentralization of mining. But this is where COVID hits, that the evolution of the mining industry was in any event going to force a consolidation of mining in South Africa. And the simple reason for that is, I say there are 3 reasons why that has to happen. The first is what we're debating today, is the technological development. And technological development forces forces you to have a certain size in the mining operations in order to be able to harness that technological advancement. Secondly, economies of scale and the need to remain globally competitive will force companies to consolidate and be able to remain competitive. And small mining companies are vulnerable to external factors that impact on that ability to remain globally competitive. And the third issue is a seriously difficult issue for South Africa to grapple with, and that is infrastructure challenges. And specifically, let me highlight electricity. Now, it is encouraging that the South African government has consolidated the Departments of Energy and the Departments of Minerals into one, because the one cannot operate without the other. And as you mentioned, Freudis, we were all fantastically positive at the Indaba in February this year. And what did we have? We have the Minister of Minerals and Energy throwing us a little bone and saying, don't worry, the electricity development or the private generation of electricity will be streamlined in this country, and we will remove some of the regulatory challenges. Well, 8 months later, we are still scratching our heads and nothing has happened. And unless we address that issue, we are going to be in serious trouble in this country. And I'm going to ultimately say to you that the Department of Minerals and Energy will have to focus on that issue. So, and particularly, you know, coming off the end of our winter, when right at the end of it in the week before spring, we were hit with another stage 4 load shedding scenario. Now, just to put that into context, that is 4 gigawatts of power being dropped off the grid immediately without any forewarning. That instability ties in with other instabilities that are created within the government. And again, this is part of the hypothesis of what I say we need to focus on. So when we look at the future of the South African mining industry, I say, my hypothesis is that there will be a consolidation of mining. I say that was there anyway. It was going to happen. It was going to be part of an evolution. What COVID has brought is the acceleration of that. Now, this is where a number of difficult challenges come in. And one of the primary difficulties is employment. South Africa currently faces a 30.1% unemployment rate. 500,000 people are directly employed in this industry. Tenfold people are supported by those people directly employed. And I'm not even dealing with the cottage industry that sits around the mining industry. I'm not even dealing with the downstream beneficiation. So it is an extremely important issue for a government that has a socialist undertone and a power base that is aligned with trade unions. And we have seen in this country how difficult it has been for the South African government to deal with the business rescue of the airline. South African Airways has been really, really difficult to manage. And primarily what lies at the heart of it is the employment challenge. So what we see in the South African regulatory space is that no consolidation can happen without regulatory approval. You cannot transfer a mining right without the government's intervention and approval of it. Now, herein lies a challenge, because what we see is that the government, as part of the consideration of the transfer of mining rights, considers the employment impact. And it's quite correct that one looks at the employment impact, but in the context of technological advancement, which one of the masters are you going to serve? Are you going to preserve employment for the sake of preserving employment from a regulatory perspective? Or are you going to preserve the industry? And it is the proverbial goose that lays the golden eggs. And we cannot have a scenario that we focus only on employment and in doing so, not allow the consolidation that is required in order to harness technological advances and the need for economies of scale and a global competitiveness. So ultimately, I say that what the Department of Minerals and Energy should do as part of this evolution is they should focus on three things. First and foremost, South Africa has the dark cloud of corruption hanging over us, and the government has to get a control of it. If we want to be part of the global arena, we have to play by the global rules. And anti-corruption is one of the first and primary issues. And that goes into the context of how you transfer mining rights. Expectations created by certain advisors that one can easily and quickly obtain the permission to transfer a mining right only sends the
I think we've lost Wessel. He was in the middle of the second of 3 points as a conclusion to his remarks. We'll hope we get him back. In the meantime, I'll bridge by going back to our first couple of speakers with some questions that have both occurred to me and have been suggested in the Q&A function. I'll reiterate to participants that you can put questions in the Q&A function, but it looks like we have Wessel back. Wessel, we lost you about halfway through your second point. Do we have you back? Wessel,
Aaron, am I back?
Yes, you're back, yes.
I do not
welcome
know.
Back. Welcome back.
Thank you very, very much. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to probably do a little bit of a rewind. I think I was at the point of trying to say what the 3 points are that I think the government should focus on.
Yes, you're into the second point. So we got the first.
Well, okay, so I've dealt with the corruption issue.
Yes.
The second issue is electricity. And as I've touched on it already, I think it's absolutely important that we now tackle the issue of electricity supply in this country and the stable supply of it. It is not good enough simply to remove the regulatory barriers of energy, private energy generation. It cannot only be done by mining mining right holders, and on the basis that they have to privately generate power. We need off-balance sheet infrastructure and an ability for private energy producers to come into the country in order to create a stable environment. Without that stable environment, we will not have development of the mining industry. And I think the third and very important issue for me is regulatory certainty and regulatory streamline. Time kills deals, so the old maxim goes. Now, if you have to deal with, and particularly currently we're dealing with many mining companies that are in financial distress, if you have to deal with the regulatory approval on an open-ended basis and you do not know when you're going to get the approval, it puts an uncertainty to that particular transaction. And as time unfolds, the uncertainty becomes more concerning, and that is an issue which needs to be dealt with. Now, I do know that the Department of Minerals and Energy have a task team that is currently looking at ways in which to improve the regulatory certainty and the regulatory streamlining, and that's encouraging. But those are the three issues that I think we should be focusing on as a country from a regulatory perspective in order to deal with what I say is the natural evolution of the particular industry. And I suspect, Aaron, that each of those is a topic on its own and a seminar on its own, but thank you very much for the opportunity of being part of this esteemed panel.
Thank you, Wesley. Yes, our comms team is paying close attention. We have a number of subjects of webinars of the future we've broached here, and we're happy to dive into them each in turn. But thank you for those remarks. I think it's a good snapshot of what's going on in South Africa with, of course, global implications, right? So these are not challenges that are unique to South Africa. And let me turn now to a session of question and answer with the panelists. And as an umbrella to that, let me note that all three of you have talked about COVID as an accelerator of existing trends. And we had, in our work on New Tech, New Deal, thought about new technology as an accelerator of trends and something that laid bare existing problems that needed to be dealt with. And now COVID as a further accelerator, we're rapidly coming to warp speed in terms of changes in the industry and challenges posed to the industry. So I'm going to pose a couple of general questions to all panelists, and then an individual question to each panelist. As a general question, one of the participants has noted that, of course, the challenges we're talking about here and the opportunities we're talking about here are not specific to the mining sector, and has asked what kinds of possibilities there are for cross-sectoral collaboration on the challenges we face. For example, Freud has talked about the need for a focus on skills as one of the potential solutions to the challenges. Obviously, that skills challenge is not one that is specific to the mining sector, nor is a solution specific to the mining sector. So what kinds of possibilities do we see, and what challenges do we see as a mining sector addressing that, given that it is a challenge that, and policies to address that challenge reach far beyond the mining sector? That's one general question. Another general question that's been put by the panelists is what kinds of opportunities there are for this in this particular context for women in the mine of the future. Do the new technologies offer us any possibilities of hoping that mining as a general endeavor becomes less masculine in its focus and offers more opportunities for employment for women as professionals in the mining industries, not only in Africa but globally? With those general questions, let me also pose some individual questions to each of the panelists, and I'll have panelists come in turn then to think about both of those and any other questions that they've seen, because they are coming up also as we speak. Osvaldo, you talked a little bit about one of the things you mentioned was the opportunities for local innovation, and the idea that we need to think about not only the challenges, but the opportunities to be seized. And one of them was the opportunity to involve locals in the innovation process in the mining sector. If you could give us some of the examples of that, or some of the possibilities you see of that in the Chilean context, I think participants would find that particularly interesting. Freudis, you talked about the need for governments to address inequalities, and one of the answers to that, of course, is skills development and upskilling. But of course, the challenge there is twofold. One is that you have perhaps incongruous timescales. If we need to start at a basic elementary level in giving local community members and potential employees the skills they need to be employed in the mine of the future, that the timescale for those kinds of policy solutions may be incongruous with the timescales of mining operations and investment. And so how does, this gets us into the questions of boundaries. Where does a mining company like Anglo fit in, and how does it support government policies that are long-lived and arguably outside of the mining sector's expertise? And I think one of the panelists asked for some better description of the excellent work that Anglo is doing in Limpopo. And you might weave in both a description of the Limpopo project and some sort of an answer to that basic question in your response. And Vessel, let me ask you, and this is unfair because it goes beyond what you've contributed up to this point, but of course, I found it very interesting, and I think the participants did too, your description of these two drivers as impelling a consolidation in the industry, as making it necessary to have a great deal of capital to invest in innovation. So the question is, what does this mean for artisanal and small scale mining? And I realize this goes beyond what you've spoken about, but if you've had any thoughts on that subject, I'd be happy to hear them. So let's go in the order that we originally spoke. Osvaldo, happy to hear from you in response to those questions or others you have seen in the question and answer. And I think we have ample time for, provided we have nice, succinct answers, I think we have ample time for another round as well. So please keep the questions and answers coming, and we'll harvest them. Osvaldo, over to you.
Thank you, Aaron. Just a couple of points before addressing your question, Aaron. First, I think it's very important to notice that the context matter a lot. Yeah, just by listening, Vessel, you know that what the challenges that the South African mining industry is facing probably is unique, and the solution also is unique. And we need to consider that very much when we're thinking about how to deal with those challenges, how to make a deal with or interact with the government, how to develop different solutions. Probably some of the things that the industry need to bring from the past to the future, which was a theme that was positioned first by the people from marketing, but then also from the people from NGO, is this local concept. This blending of being global and being local at the same time. So there is no one solution that will fit all the sizes. That it should be very context specific. Related to the innovation opportunities, and that is also related to a little bit of what Vessel mentioned, is if you see how innovation take place in the mining industry and in this consolidated sector, probably innovation is coming more and more as an open innovation process. What I mean by that is that most of the innovation is not taking place within mining companies, is the interaction between mining companies and the more on the suppliers. The suppliers are the ones that are exposed to a higher frequency of challenges, and because of that, their learning and innovation process is probably more fertile than a mining company that has a more constrained set of challenges to test innovations. And by innovation, basically what I mean is solutions. So the opportunities probably are related to what you just mentioned, Aaron, about these cross-sectoral collaborations. The challenges are not just challenges of the mining industry, these are also challenges of other sectors. For instance, if you're talking about opportunities like electromobility, which is something that in my region is something that is starting to be implemented. Given the size and the complexity and the depth of knowledge that exists in the mining industry can be a driver to develop an electromobility capacity for the mining industry, but that also can create the threshold of capacity to also drive or to build the capacity to have electromobility solutions for other industrial sectors. When you talk about another example of nature-based solutions in order to mitigate climate change. So probably the master of that technology, of that solution, is the forestry sector, because is part of the core of their business. Is, when you have the tree on the tree is capturing carbon, and then they are selling their carbon to offset their own emission. Probably is a natural partnership. It can emerge between the mining industry and the forestry industry in order to build this nature-based solution, and creating a win-win partnership or solution. So the key is to engage, I think, the supply chain, which also was totally globalized. Usually what happens is that when the large mining corporation face a challenge, they go to the global industry in order to find the solutions. In particular, when the industry was in a country that is not that advanced in terms of technological and innovation capacity. So part of the challenge is how to create from the very beginning, from the investment stage of a mining project, to open those space so that the large OEMs or the large suppliers that are the ones that are providing the most advanced technologies enable also to have the local capacities, the local suppliers, to participate in the process of creating those solutions and on the complete set of challenges that the mining industry is facing, like reducing water consumption, reducing carbon footprint, increasing the availability of equipment, and so on and so forth. On that kind of arrangements are not totally present now in the bidding process during the investment stage of a project, and also to the operational phase of the project. So by opening that box or that window, probably we can speed up the participation of local capacity and local supplier in the generation of the solutions that the mining industry needs for the operation in the future, which will be also linked to the same solution that other industrial sector needs.
Thanks, Osvaldo. This is a nice concrete. For those that don't know the Chilean innovation process, I think this is an interesting illustration of one of the opportunities offered. Let me turn to Freudis now to address either the questions I've posed or one that you've seen that piques your interest in the Q&A function. Freudis, please.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, I think we have so much to learn from the Chile stuff as well. I can't emphasize that enough. It's been really interesting, and also I think having the kind of progressive government engagement as well around innovation and how you approach things, I think has been really, that's kind of key as well. With regard to the questions you posed me, I think the marrying up of the skills and the time thing, Aaron, you never have enough time and you kind of have to start somewhere. The way we're approaching it is we're thinking very much around kind of doing some strategic workforce planning ourselves. So if you're doing your own strategic workforce planning, you then understand kind of what the skills are that you're going to need. And then it's about really thinking through, these are not sort of new skills that, you need to have a completely new person. There's often skills that you're going to need in the future for the future of work that basically are easily it's easy to build on current skills to get people to the skill level that they're needed for some of the other work. So I think it's about not thinking too much, oh my gosh, this needs to be a whole new set of skills, but actually how do you understand what the buckets of work are and the skills that you need, and how do you build on the skills that you have? Because ultimately that's going to be a huge part of the responsible transition that you're going to have to support, as opposed to just making a whole bunch of people redundant and bringing in a whole new set of people, which often you don't have those skills anyway. And I think what we're trying to do, to your point, is really ensure that there is maximum participation ability or opportunity for our communities. And so again, thinking through, if you have an electrical engineer, with the skills that they've got, some of the work will still stay, but then they may be having to do some more digitization around some of their work, and how do you support them with the skills development? The other thing is, I think I haven't done enough research on other countries, but historically, a lot of countries had an industrial strategy, and that seemed to be a term that kind of fell out of fashion. And I think actually almost sort of revitalizing the sort of national industrial strategy where it pertains to sort of skills and where the country sees itself in the future, I think is something that governments really need to be thinking quite seriously about. And then from that, everything kind of flows, whether it's the education system, whether it's the industry that they want to support. Countries like Singapore have done this incredibly well. They've had substantial manufacturing skills, a lot more than you would think for Singapore, but they've basically been looking at how they transition those manufacturing skills and processing skills into the kind of digital and automated environment as well. So again, it's very easy to do something in somewhere like Singapore versus South Africa, but I think there's definitely lessons you can kind of take and learn from. And this, I think, leads me to the comment, the more information about the local project that we've got, or the local partnership. Having a national industrial strategy would be amazing, but sometimes that's just so huge. Where do you start in trying to put that together? So actually thinking about things at a regional level and actually taking your kind of geography down to a more manageable, practically implementable region, I think is very much a kind of an approach where you can kind of get things going. So the work that we're doing in Limpopo, it's actually called the Impact Catalyst, and it's actually a consortia in some ways between ourselves, Exaro, other mining companies, the government. And what it is to really try to build, and I won't say an industrial strategy, but a regional economic development plan. And it's not Anglo-Americans, it's not the mining industry, it's the regions. And we use basically a lot of spatial analysis to really understand what the economic opportunities are that could then be, I guess, invested in, or does the government need to put in a little bit more infrastructure to realize those economic opportunities? And really a lot of this, and this kind of is a bit different to the historical model with mining, where you develop a lot of social or local content that is very dependent on the mine, to actually developing a regional plan where the mine acts as a catalyst to get the economic engine going in the region, but ultimately all of the economic engines that you then create would be independent of the mine. So one example could be biofuels. Spatial analysis has indicated that the environment there is very good for biofuels crops. Grow the biofuels crops, the mine could be like an anchor customer to get that small business up and running, get them to scale, and then they can service other customers in the region or further afield as well. So ultimately you're creating, the mine then becomes a catalyst as opposed to a dependency, which was actually more the historic kind of relationship from a socioeconomic perspective in terms of the local multiplier effect that mines provided in the regions. And again, in the post-COVID context, I think looking at things from a regional perspective, where you can actually get things moving and you can be much more focused and targeted, I think is something that is definitely worth governments looking at. And then for the mining sector and the extractive sector, really thinking about things at a regional level, so you can actually start doing something there. And that, of course, goes with schools, with skills development. You know, you don't want to take on the whole education system in a country because that's the government's job, but how could you then support at a local level technical colleges, universities, high schools to actually then be part of the curriculum creation that would then enable them to participate in the future jobs, not just the future mining jobs. So it's not just let me invest in the mining engineer of the future. Let's invest in the engineers of the future, so that everybody is maximizing their opportunity. And I would just like to, I know it sounds cliche that I would address the women question, but it's something I feel very passionately about. I think the impact of technology is going to be a huge leveler in terms of the gender parity opportunities in the mining sector. You know, historically, it had to be a man's job to lug big, heavy equipment. Well, if you are now running a small game console to drive big haul trucks, you know, women are better drivers. So, you know, it doesn't matter whether you're in the truck or you're driving it remotely. It will be hugely, it will just be a completely different leveler. And there is a myth that I heard, and by a CEO of a big major mining company who's got very ambitious targets for parity across the organization. Oswaldo will know them very well. And I think they were saying, you know, when they put these targets out there, everybody kind of went, you're nuts, you're crazy, you're never going to do it. But if you don't kind of put it out there, how are you going to aim for something? And it also made people think differently. So I know from a kind of control room operator, it opened up a whole new area of talent pools that the company now draws on, which ironically was more staffed with women, because the hours that the control room expertise had was much more sort of family or caring responsibility friendly. So you've put the commitment out there, you know, you're moving with new technology, it requires new skills, new skill pools, and actually, you know, you never know what the opportunities are going to be, because you need to start looking at things through very different lenses. That again, you know, drawing on skill pools that have maybe slightly different working hours, and therefore you can bring those skills in. And we've all proven with COVID that working from home, working flexibly is not rocket science. And so I think, you know, the way we work, I mean, the future of work is here, right now. And it's how we kind of build on that to create what the new normal is, so we don't go back to the old normal, which would just be very disappointing.
Thanks, Freudis, for a masterful address to all the questions posed to you, and for bringing it back to COVID at the end. Very nicely done. I wish we had more time to explore all of these. Another webinar on Limpopo, for example, and another one on the women's place in Mine of the Future.
Sorry, Aaron, just one thing. If anybody wants any more information on Limpopo, I'm very happy to provide that to IGF. I'll actually put a link in the Q&A right now, and then please drop me a line.
So just as a matter of housekeeping, we will be sending all participants a thank you note with the record of this recording, and we will make available the materials that Freudis has posted and send them around as well. Wessel, it falls to you, a heavy responsibility to be the last to answer, and as you say, after a couple of nice drives down the fairway. And let me say that you don't have to feel constrained to answer the questions I've asked. There have also been a couple of questions posed by participants about the idea of shared infrastructure, picking up on your analysis of the challenges of the electricity sector in South Africa, asking whether shared infrastructure in areas like electricity and water might be one of the types of responses we could see to the need for mining companies to bring value to a community beyond the direct employment that they used to provide. So feel free to range into answering that as a question as well. I'll leave the floor to you.
That's a good segue. Let me start right there. Picking up on from what you say, Freud, it's almost akin to the mining company for a local community, like the anchor tenant of a shopping center. It gives the pull and it gives the particular gravitas of that industry in that area. And for many local communities, we have to sadly accept that the supply of healthcare and the supply of education is predominantly reliable. The healthcare and education is reliant on the mine. If the mine wasn't there, it wouldn't exist. And let me then touch on the issue, which is a very sensitive issue for Africa and for South Africa, and that's the stable supply of water. Many mines are the sole reason why we have water infrastructure, to the extent that certain mining companies have built water supply to municipalities, not only to informal local communities. So the impact of the mining, the direct mining, is where you have that immediate cross-sector. You have the cross-sector pollination into the downstream and what I say, the cottage industry in and around that mining industry. Now, if you look at that, and I want to then go back to the question that was posed of me of what is the impact on small or artisanal mining. Now, I want to draw a distinction between small and artisanal. Small mining companies are, I have a negative outlook as far as small mining companies are concerned. I'm saying that we will have to see a consolidation. Small is going to become medium, medium is going to become large. For the very reason that when you have a certain size, you are able to bring a bigger impact in the community in which you operate. And the need for us to have that evolution happening is just something that is going to happen. And that's where I again say COVID is that accelerator for it, because as balance sheets are not strong at the moment, that's where you are going to find that distressed mining companies are starting to consolidate and in order to survive. But that brings us to the question of capital. And capital is one of the driver reasons why I say you will have a consolidation, because the access to capital is dependent on the ability to lend that capital or attract the equity investment. Now, if you look at South Africa at the moment, we have, in order for South Africa to meet its governmental development plan, it needs to have a GDP growth of in the order of 5.5% to 6%. We will not see, if we are lucky, we will see 1% this year. So what we are seeing at the moment is a negative outlook of South Africa, and in order to meet its very basic development. And that brings the question of capital. Now, to a large extent, government is the basis or is the door on which you knock for capital. The South African government's ability to continue to being that support of the industry is dwindling. Because if you think about it at the moment, COVID has cost this country already an IMF loan of just over $4 billion. Now, you're talking about future generations that have to pay that. We've got to pay the impact of COVID. We've got to pay the impact of loans. We've got to pay the impact of an inefficient government. And the ability to have access to capital is going to drive a negative outlook, in my view, in relation to small mining. Small mining, as I say, will become medium mining, and medium mining is going to become larger mining over time. As far as artisanal mining is concerned, it's a real difficulty in South Africa. Artisanal mining, to a large extent, is equated with illegal mining. And illegal mining is a real difficulty because, you know, in host communities where you have defunct mining operations, that's a breeding ground for artisanal mining and illegal mining. And we have not seen a ready solution to how to deal with this. And what you then have is you have an informal industry developing. You have a mob mentality that happens and a lawlessness that happens as a result of it, and people get hurt. So there's a need for creative solutions when it comes to artisanal mining in South Africa, what I equate to illegal mining. But certainly in respect of small operations, the threats are very negative. I do think, however, that if we continue to drive the social impact of mining, we will see the cross development of sectors within the mining space. One of the important things that we look at from a regulatory perspective is, what do we do with a mining operation at the end of life of mine? What is the sustainable development? What is the legacy that we leave? It's not simply come in, take the minerals and leave nothing. And that I think, we need to start making this the priority. It's the education. Education drives the prosperity of a nation. And that's really where we need to start focusing. And that will start dealing with all of these issues, because a better education brings a better workforce, brings a better embrace of technology, and all of these things. So from that perspective, those are my contributions to that particular debate.
Thank you, Wessel. I think that's an excellent contribution, and again, spot on topic. And again, one of these questions that we could pursue in greater depth with a dedicated effort. Let me come back now in closing to ask each of the speakers to give us any closing thoughts. And these can be reactions to what you've heard your fellow panelists say. They can be reactions to the Q&A that has come in ongoing during the seminar, or summary thoughts about the broad themes we've addressed here, the umbrella of the twin drivers of COVID and technological change. And I'm going to mix up the order a little bit. Just a couple of minutes of closing thoughts from each of you. I'm going to go back to you, Wessel. I'm going to reverse the order a bit and go back to you, Wessel, for a quick minute or two of closing thoughts. Anything you think you've taken from the seminar that you'd like to highlight as interesting, and of course, as someone in charge of producing research in this area, I'll be keenly listening to your thoughts.
Thank you. I think to a large extent, I have particularly focused on some of the challenges, and that is perhaps an occupational hazard, being a lawyer. But the reality is that in and about the disruptions that you have to industries, you always have opportunities. And there are plenty of opportunities available to the astute investor and the investors that are astute to understand the development of, or the evolution of, an industry. And if you focus on those opportunities, there are many positives that can come from a disruption such as COVID. We always say that we rebuild, but we rebuild better, because it would just be foolish for humans to simply go back to what we used to be. There is a new platform available for those who are astute and alive to what is going on, and understanding what the impact is, and what those drivers are. So I see many opportunities within this country, within the Southern African region, and on the continent as a whole, for a really wonderful development that will enhance the positive impact for communities and people of several nations on the African continent. So I'm an optimist. I see that we are going to definitely see some development in the future, and I remain optimistic, cautiously optimistic, let me rather say.
I like your optimism. Optimism is always a good place to end. For this, I'm going to give you the last word. So Osvaldo, I'm going to turn to you for any closing thoughts, highlights that you've taken from the seminar, challenges for the future. So Osvaldo, you're still there.
Yes. There you go. Yes. So yes, yes. What I would like to stress some of the points that I made in my opening words is one is related to how to address this kind of fragmentation in terms of how to tackle the different challenges that the mining industry is facing, and in particular under the context of the COVID crisis. So each of the mining companies are doing fantastic work, but they work like the independent republic of mining company A, B, C, and D, and then you have another one which is the government, and then you have this. So that's that's a quite significant waste of resources that it makes almost impossible to almost to trace and to report where are the gaps, where are the progress, what is working, what is not working. And now the investor is sort of also going into that discussion with the requirements related to how the different the different corporations are integrating the ESG standard, environment, sustainable and governance standard, to allocate the capital. So it's getting even more complex on that. So besides, the metrics of the mining companies, the investors, and the government, all of the profits of the mining industry is going to the people that do the reporting at the end of the day. So how to have a common set of standard measures so that we have just a single report that will help us to attract investment. Because if that single report is aligned with the ESG standards, it will make much simpler to make the proper assessment of whether the investment are meeting the new standards. And at the same time, if that is independent, that it will provide also a higher level of trust. So that's an area that I think we need to work much more, and probably the resources that we all are already spending on that. By we, I mean the mining companies and the government is enough to make a much better work. The other point that I would like to make is related to how to invest social investment, and probably this related to Frody's work related to social license to innovate. Probably it has been the case that most of our social investment has gone through to tackling some social problems that are beyond the problems that mining is creating, like education or access to infrastructure. But we are not allocating enough of that money, of the social investment money, in order to create the capacity at the local level that would enable local communities to participate in the innovation process. So the social license to innovate will never happen because there is nobody that had the capacity to innovate. So probably part of the challenge is allocating part of the social investment process in order to build the capacities so that the communities, the local or the regional or the national community can participate in the innovation process. And by participating in the innovation process, they're also getting a higher share of the benefits that the innovation is bringing, because they're part owner of the solutions. So these are my two remarks, Aaron.
Thanks, Osvaldo. So many common threads. So you're weaving back into the kinds of horizontal linkages that Anglo is addressing in the Limpopo work and elsewhere. And Froydis, I'll turn it to you for last words, after which I'll thank and close the seminar.
But I don't have really much to add, I don't think. I just want to say thank you. I really learned a lot. I think, Osvaldo, you need to do more of this, talking about the innovation stuff, because I really do think there's so much for other countries to learn on the approach. And I think the thing that my own personal journey has been around the sort of new tech, new deal was when I first started working on this, I was like, holy cow, this is really scary. This is like, how do you even get your head around the big issue of the jobs piece, the education piece, and I think as you sort of, again, it's sort of like, how do you eat an elephant, one piece at a time. It's just trying to get, your head around the issue and the context in which you are operating, with the realization that context is dynamic, so you don't get fixed in your kind of trained track of how you're going to approach it. So maybe not a pure engineer's view, but kind of having a sort of dynamic dare I say the word, agile approach to how you approach innovation in a sort of full impact decision-making thought process. And for me, there was a question there which is about what do you think the most disruptive technology is going to be? I think actually it's not just about the technology. I think you really need to think about how you talk and engage with people about the technology. So a technology that could be seen by one person as hugely disruptive to another person is kind of life-changing in a positive way. So I think there's, you know, the disruption can also come from a lot of misunderstanding and fear of the unknown. And I think it's really incumbent on us as an industry and a sector to really take the time to think about how we talk about these innovations in a way that brings people along, as well as thinking about how do we make sure that we are contributing to the most responsible transition that we can kind of enable. Technology is here. Technology is always changing, and we need to embrace it. But I think we also need to be very aware about the pace and how we go about affecting that change or implementing that change so that we bring people along and we do it in the most responsible way.
Thanks, Freudis. And it's an interesting reminder that technology is not always machines. Innovation and technology can take the forms of the way in which mining companies relate to their local communities, and how that dialogue takes place. And there's some interesting innovations in that space as well. Listen, thanks to all the participants, and thanks in particular to our three speakers. We've covered a lot of ground today. We haven't answered all the questions that were posed. The ASM sector we'll have to leave for another day. An interesting set of questions, but I think we have made some really good progress in further understanding the challenge that is, as Freud said, eating the elephant. I love that analogy. And I'll leave you that the rising sun of Western Canada is forcing me ever further to the left-hand side of my screen. That must mean it's time to wrap up. Again, we will be sending out a transcript recording of this session to all participants, along with links to some of the resources that were covered here. Thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you at future events in the COVID series, and look forward to leading further and collaborating further on the work, the challenges of new technology and COVID.